If your life feels like it's on repeat, if every day feels like a copy of the last one, it's not because you're broken. It's because your brain is stuck in survival mode. But what if I told you that a new life doesn't start with massive change? It starts with one powerful decision: to take control. Not tomorrow, not next year, right now. The difference between who you are and who you want to be, it's one choice away. And in the next few minutes, I'll show you exactly how to make it. So, the human brain is fundamentally wired for survival, and one of its core survival tools is prediction. It constantly scans for patterns, routines, and expected outcomes, which allows it to create a stable framework of reality. When a person chooses to make a new start in life, changing habits, environments, or identities, they are essentially disrupting the brain's predictable map. This disruption triggers a neurological alert system, most notably involving the amygdala, which associates change with risk and uncertainty. The discomfort, anxiety, or resistance felt in these moments isn't a personal failure, it's a biological signal. It's the brain saying, "We don't know what happens next, so proceed with caution." But this discomfort is actually the first gateway to transformation, signaling the onset of neuroplasticity, the brain's capacity to rewire itself. The paradox is that real growth doesn't come from comfort zones, but from precisely this kind of internal turbulence. Learning how to interpret that discomfort correctly is the first key to a meaningful reset. You are not broken, your brain is simply adapting to new demands. When you choose to act in a way that opposes your past behavior, the brain doesn't immediately accept the new action as truth. Instead, it registers the contrast, evaluates its outcome, and determines whether it's worth integrating into long-term memory and routine. That's why consistency is far more powerful than intensity when starting over. A single dramatic gesture, like running 10 miles one day or deleting all social media, might feel satisfying, but it doesn't teach your brain a repeatable pattern. On the other hand, waking up just 30 minutes earlier each day, sitting with discomfort for 5 minutes, or journaling nightly sends a more sustainable signal. These repeated signals build new synaptic connections, reinforcing the idea that this new version of life is not a one-time event but a new reality. The more frequently the same behavior is repeated, the more myelin, the insulation around nerve fibers, is strengthened, increasing the speed and reliability of these new neural pathways. It is in this simple repetition that transformation becomes biologically embedded. A critical concept to understand in this process is that of neuroplastic readiness. The brain doesn't rewire randomly. It does so most effectively when it's in an alert but calm state. This state is achievable through specific practices: deep breathing, movement, early morning exposure to natural light, and goal setting with emotional engagement. When the brain is in this state, the hippocampus, responsible for memory, and the prefrontal cortex, responsible for decision-making, become more active. This combination allows you to encode new habits more effectively while reducing interference from old patterns. For example, if you decide to change your morning routine, doing it in a state of calm focus primes your brain to remember it as significant. Emotional salience matters too. If a behavior is tied to something meaningful, like a personal value or a life goal, it's more likely to be retained. So when starting over, it's not enough to just act differently. You must do so with intention, in an optimal internal environment. The early hours of the day are especially important for creating a new start, both psychologically and biologically. Within the first 30 to 60 minutes of waking, your brain undergoes what's known as a neurochemical cocktail. Cortisol levels peak, dopamine begins to rise, and your body is most receptive to input. This is the perfect window to introduce new behaviors, such as hydration, physical movement, or mindfulness. These activities don't just improve how you feel, they help rewire your brain to expect and accept change. They also provide a clear signal to your biological clock or circadian rhythm, anchoring the new behaviors in time and space. When done consistently, these early morning choices become foundational for the rest of the day. They serve as proof to your brain that change is happening, not as an abstract hope, but as a repeated action. Over time, these simple rituals form the scaffolding of a new life. It is here that habit meets biology and possibility becomes reality. One of the most powerful yet underutilized tools in this process is visualizing your future self while engaging in these new behaviors. The brain doesn't distinguish strongly between imagined experiences and real ones. This is the principle behind mental rehearsal. By vividly picturing yourself waking up focused, following through on goals, and living aligned with your new identity, you activate the same neural circuits as if those things were already true. When combined with physical movement, such as walking while visualizing, you engage both hemispheres of the brain, strengthening the neural imprint. These rehearsals act as training sessions for the nervous system, increasing confidence and reducing resistance. This is why people go on. More importantly, they allow the future to become emotionally familiar rather than frightening. This reduces the fear-driven responses that often sabotage early efforts to change. The brain begins to perceive the new path not as a threat, but as a viable and rewarding route. Over time, this mental preparation becomes a silent engine driving consistent action. Equally important is the recognition that setbacks are not failures. They are data points. The brain is always learning, and what it learns from temporary lapses is often more powerful than from success. When you slip, miss a workout, fall into an old pattern, skip a habit, the key is not self-judgment, but reflection. Ask what triggered the old behavior, what emotion was present, and what system was missing. This inquiry recruits the prefrontal cortex, which thrives on problem-solving and decision-making. It also reduces the influence of the limbic system, which governs impulsivity and self-sabotage. Through this process, each mistake becomes a learning signal, not a source of shame. Over time, this teaches the brain resilience and adaptability. The more you train it to recover quickly and extract lessons, the more it comes to associate failure with progress. This mindset shift is not psychological fluff. It's a rewiring of the nervous system to treat challenge as growth. Another powerful technique for reinforcing new beginnings is deliberate rest. Most people equate change with hustle, nonstop effort, and pressure. But the brain consolidates new neural pathways not during activity but during rest, especially sleep. When you sleep, the brain replays and reorganizes information, tagging what's important and discarding what's not. If you've been practicing new habits, sleep will help hardwire them into long-term memory. This is why sleep hygiene, limiting screens before bed, sleeping in a cool, dark room, and maintaining consistent hours is non-negotiable for anyone looking to change. Additionally, short breaks during the day, like nature walks or unplugged pauses, allow the brain to reset and avoid cognitive fatigue. These quiet moments aren't a waste of time. They are incubation periods where deep learning occurs. They balance the stress systems and rejuvenate mental clarity. In the context of starting a new life, rest becomes as essential as action. The support of others plays a pivotal role in shaping and stabilizing your new beginning. From a neurological perspective, humans are social creatures with brains wired for connection. Mirror neurons allow us to unconsciously adopt the behaviors and emotions of those around us. This means your environment, both physical and social, can either accelerate or sabotage your efforts. Surrounding yourself with people who embody the change you seek strengthens the neural circuits you're trying to build. You begin to borrow their energy, standards, and beliefs, making your own transformation feel more natural. On the other hand, staying around people who constantly reinforce your past identity makes rewiring difficult. So a new start sometimes requires boundary shifts. This isn't about judgment, it's about alignment. Choose environments and relationships that echo your future, not your history. When your nervous system is immersed in supportive cues, it finds the stability to evolve. Ultimately, a fresh start is not a single decision. It is a repeated negotiation with your nervous system. It is choosing, day after day, to act in alignment with the person you are becoming, not the one you've been. This process requires patience, not perfection. It demands courage, not comfort. Every action you take sends a message to your brain about who you are and what kind of life you expect. Over time, These messages become your internal narrative, and your internal narrative becomes your identity. When enough evidence stacks up, the old patterns lose their grip, not because you fight them, but because they no longer match the reality you're building. In this way, a new start is not a leap, it's a practice. It is not found in grand declarations, but in daily behaviors. And the most profound transformations begin not with inspiration, but with consistent, biologically informed action.
Change rarely arrives as a tidal wave. More often it begins as a whisper, a quiet nudge to do something different, however small. The challenge is that in a world obsessed with breakthroughs and massive shifts, people overlook the incredible power of micro changes. These small, deliberate adjustments might seem insignificant on the surface, but they are exactly what your brain is wired to respond to most effectively. Repetition, not revolution, is what the nervous system uses to establish new behavioral baselines. Even 2 minutes of focused effort done daily can begin to reshape your cognitive and emotional pathways. Over time, these consistent efforts signal to your brain that change is not only possible, it's happening. They don't overwhelm the system, instead they allow it to gradually adapt and adopt. This method creates long-term sustainability rather than a temporary rush of motivation. Tiny shifts may be the slowest to start but become the most stable foundation for transformation. Every time you perform a new behavior, especially one aligned with your ideal self, you activate a unique neurological loop. This loop involves motivation, action, and reward, 3 stages that condition the brain to recognize the behavior as beneficial. You may not notice it the first time you drink more water, go for a short walk, or journal for a few minutes, but the brain notices because even small wins trigger dopamine release. Dopamine isn't just a feel-good chemical, it's the fuel that tells your brain this is worth repeating. When these wins accumulate, they strengthen the neural pathways responsible for focus, discipline, and identity. The mistake most people make is underestimating the power of these repetitions. Waiting for the perfect mood or ideal circumstances only delays the process. What the brain truly responds to is frequency and emotional salience, not intensity. So the more often you repeat the right behaviors, the more you become the person who lives that way naturally. These micro shifts work so well because they bypass the fear response. Large, abrupt changes activate stress circuits that often lead to overwhelm and retreat. But small steps feel manageable to the brain, which interprets them as non-threatening. That's why taking a 5-minute walk is easier to commit to than promising to go to the gym for 2 hours. Once you start succeeding at these small tasks, your confidence begins to rise, not through abstract affirmations, but through actual neurochemical reinforcement. Confidence is a byproduct of progress, not a prerequisite. These modest achievements teach the brain something powerful. I can do this. The belief in your ability to change doesn't come from inspiration, it comes from evidence. By repeating successful actions, you create a sense of self-efficacy, your internal belief that you can influence outcomes. And once that belief takes root, it starts to override old narratives of limitation or self-doubt. With each micro shift, you build psychological resilience. This strategy also redefines your relationship with time. Most people dramatically overestimate what they can do in a day and underestimate what they can do in a year. The beauty of small, consistent changes is that they compound. 1 extra glass of water per day becomes 365 more over the year. A 10-minute morning routine adds up to over 60 hours annually. These accumulations are how identity begins to shift. You are no longer simply trying to change. You are, in fact, changing. It's not the scale of the change that matters, but the consistency of it. Each repetition is a brushstroke on the canvas of your new life. When viewed in isolation, each action may seem trivial, but together they form a mosaic of who you are becoming. Over time, the compound effect transforms your results, your habits, and eventually your core sense of identity. It's not magic, it's mathematics applied to behavior. When it comes to behavior change, the brain uses an internal scoreboard. This isn't about tracking perfection, but about accumulating proof that you're on a new path. Every decision is either a vote for the future you or a vote for the past version. Skipping one session won't erase progress, but consistently showing up builds a winning streak. The key is to stay focused on what's called identity-based habits. These are habits that are not just tasks, but statements of who you are. When you meditate, you're not just reducing stress, you're becoming someone who takes care of their mind. When you prepare healthy food, you're not just eating better, you're becoming someone who respects their body. These small acts, performed regularly, become proof to your subconscious that you are changing at the identity level. That identity shift, more than any external achievement, is what leads to lasting transformation. Change who you believe you are, and behavior will follow. Micro shifts also allow for something critical: feedback. With smaller steps, it becomes easier to measure what's working and what isn't. You can quickly identify whether a habit fits your lifestyle, whether it energizes or depletes you, whether it aligns with your values or needs refinement. This feedback loop allows for real-time adjustments, making the journey toward change more flexible and adaptive. Instead of committing to drastic routines you can't maintain, you fine-tune your actions based on what your mind and body respond to. This self-awareness enhances emotional intelligence and builds a more intuitive connection to your internal signals. It also prevents burnout, a common consequence of unsustainable change. When you adjust in small ways, you avoid extremes and move forward with more balance. That balance is key to maintaining the consistency required for deep, lasting change. You learn to become both the architect and the editor of your new life. A critical aspect of building new patterns is environmental design. The spaces we inhabit can either reinforce our old behaviors or support the new ones. Small tweaks to your environment, placing a journal on your pillow, setting out workout clothes the night before, removing junk food from sight, have enormous effects on daily behavior. These cues act as silent guides for your attention and intention. When you control your environment, you reduce the cognitive load required to make better choices. Instead of relying on willpower, which is limited and fatigues quickly, you rely on design. You make the preferred behaviors the easiest ones to perform. In doing so, you create what's known as a choice architecture, a space that supports who you are trying to become. These subtle environmental shifts, though easy to implement, can fundamentally change how you interact with your world each day. They make the new identity more accessible, not through force, but through flow. The transformation also requires redefining what success looks like. In the beginning stages of change, success is not about perfection, it's about direction. It's not about doing everything right. It's about doing one small thing differently and consistently. When you break free from the all-or-nothing mindset, you give yourself permission to evolve instead of expecting instant results. This perspective makes it easier to sustain momentum, especially on hard days. You begin to celebrate progress instead of punishing imperfection. You realize that the true metric of change is not how dramatically you start, but how consistently you continue. Each day you show up, regardless of how you feel, is a win. These quiet, steady wins are what create the confidence to dream bigger, aim higher, and take on greater challenges. Eventually, they lead to a new standard for how you live, not because you forced it, but because you built it brick by brick. There's also a social dimension to microshifts. When people see you make small, steady improvements, they often become curious, supportive, or even inspired. This positive feedback reinforces your commitment. More importantly, it shifts how others perceive you, which can influence your own self-perception. Social reinforcement can help stabilize identity change. When others begin to say, "You're so consistent," or "You've really changed," it affirms that your actions are visible and impactful. This creates a loop of recognition which fuels further change. The process becomes less lonely and more communal. In some cases, your small changes spark ripple effects in others, creating a culture of improvement around you. While the change begins with you, it rarely ends with you. You become living proof that transformation is possible, not because of grand gestures, but because of daily devotion to a higher version of yourself. In the end, micro shifts don't just change habits, they change identity. They take something abstract like personal growth and ground it in daily action. Every time you show up for yourself, your brain takes notice. Every small win becomes a vote in favor of the person you're trying to become. And with enough repetition, those votes accumulate into an unshakable sense of self. You are no longer wishing for change, you are living it. The transformation isn't loud, but it's lasting. It's not about becoming someone new overnight. It's about returning to the core of who you were always meant to be. With each step forward, no matter how small, you send a clear message: I am becoming. And the most powerful part is that this kind of change isn't reserved for the extraordinary. It's available to anyone willing to begin, one small shift at a time. Change becomes sustainable when biology and intention align. Most people attempt to transform their lives through willpower alone, but the body plays an equal, if not more important role in that process. When your biological systems are out of balance, no amount of motivation can consistently override fatigue, emotional reactivity, or lack of focus. However, when you understand how to work with your body's natural rhythms and chemistry, change stops being a constant uphill battle. Your brain and nervous system become allies, not obstacles. A new start in life then must include more than just a shift in mindset. It must involve deliberate engagement with your physiology. This means using the tools of movement, breath, light, and sleep as anchors. These tools not only energize and stabilize your body, but also enhance cognitive function and emotional regulation. Your biology isn't separate from your success. It's the engine of it. One of the most powerful biological levers for change is exposure to natural light early in the morning. Within the first hour of waking, getting at least 10 minutes of sunlight helps regulate your internal clock, your circadian rhythm, which controls energy, mood, and alertness. This single act sets off a cascade of hormonal and neural signals, increasing alertness, promoting neurotransmitters like norepinephrine and dopamine. It also helps regulate cortisol levels, which naturally peak in the morning and drop off throughout the day. When this rhythm is supported, focus improves, stress decreases, and sleep becomes deeper and more restorative. These outcomes may sound basic, but they form the foundation of consistent, goal-oriented behavior. When your energy is predictable and your mind clear, your ability to stick with new habits increases dramatically. The sun doesn't just wake up your body, it programs your brain for better decision-making. In this way, light becomes a trigger for life transformation. Movement is another essential biological tool that supports new beginnings. Physical activity isn't just for cardiovascular health or appearance. It profoundly affects brain function. Regular movement, especially moderate, sustained activity like walking, jogging, or cycling, increases blood flow to the brain and stimulates the release of neurochemicals that boost learning and motivation. These include brain divergent neurotrophic factor, BDNF, often called miracle grow for the brain, which supports the growth and survival of neurons. Even just 20 minutes of light to moderate exercise can elevate mood and sharpen focus for hours. Movement also regulates the autonomic nervous system, helping shift the body from a stress-dominant state into one of balance and readiness. It's not about intensity or complexity, it's about consistency. When movement becomes a non-negotiable part of your day, it signals to your entire system that you're preparing for a better life. The body becomes primed, and the brain becomes more receptive to learning and habit formation. Another crucial tool in the biological toolkit for change is breath work. Breath serves as a direct bridge between conscious control and automatic processes in the body. Most systems in the body, like digestion or heart rate, are not under voluntary control. But breath is unique because you can consciously regulate it, and in doing so, influence your entire physiological state. Slow, deliberate breathing patterns such as inhaling through the nose and extending the exhale can quickly activate the parasympathetic nervous system. This shift reduces anxiety, improves focus, and creates a calm but alert state ideal for behavior change. When the body feels safe and balanced, the brain is more willing to let go of old patterns and embrace new ones. Breathwork also improves interoception, your awareness of internal body signals, which enhances emotional regulation and decision-making. Just 5 minutes of intentional breathing each day can reshape how your nervous system responds to stress and challenge. That regulation is the key to long-term stability in a new life. Sleep is perhaps the most overlooked biological foundation for personal transformation. When sleep is compromised, so is every cognitive and emotional function needed for change. Memory, focus, discipline, and resilience all deteriorate without adequate, high-quality sleep. During deep sleep, your brain performs essential maintenance, consolidating new memories, clearing waste products, and regulating emotional circuits. It's also when hormone levels stabilize and the nervous system resets. Inadequate sleep makes it more likely that you'll revert to automatic conditioned behaviors, the very patterns you're trying to break. Protecting sleep is not a luxury, it's a discipline. This means prioritizing a consistent bedtime, minimizing blue light exposure before bed, and creating a cool, dark sleep environment. Each night of deep sleep not only repairs the body, but prepares the mind to stay aligned with the new behaviors you're building. Sleep doesn't just help you recover, it helps you evolve. Cold exposure is another biologically effective tool that can accelerate mental clarity and behavioral momentum. Brief sessions of cold showers or immersion in cold water trigger the release of dopamine and norepinephrine, sharpening focus and elevating mood for hours. This response also trains your stress systems to become more adaptable, improving resilience. Regular exposure to controlled stressors like cold can actually help recalibrate your body's response to future challenges. The idea isn't to seek discomfort for its own sake, but to condition the mind and body to remain calm and focused under pressure. The more your nervous system experiences controlled challenge and recovery, the more capable you become of handling unpredictable stress in daily life. This translates into a calmer, more grounded approach to change. As the body becomes more resilient, so does your mindset. You begin to feel not only physically stronger, but more emotionally equipped to build a new path forward. Nutrition, too, plays a silent but powerful role in behavioral consistency. Food is information to your cells and your brain. Nutrients regulate the production of neurotransmitters, hormones, and enzymes that affect energy, mood, and focus. High-sugar, low-nutrient diets create erratic energy spikes and crashes, increasing irritability and impulsivity. On the other hand, whole, nutrient-dense foods support steady glucose levels and optimal brain function. When you eat intentionally, you create a biological environment that supports clarity and emotional balance. This doesn't mean perfection, it means creating a baseline of nourishment that your brain can rely on. Hydration is equally critical. Even mild dehydration can impair concentration and memory. Drinking enough water daily is a simple but foundational act of self-regulation. When your body is fueled and hydrated properly, your mind becomes sharper, decisions become easier, and your willpower becomes stronger. What you put into your body becomes the platform for what you build with your life. Just as important as these physical practices is the rhythm and structure of your daily routine. The brain thrives on predictability and repetition. Establishing regular wake times, meal times, and periods of focused work and recovery helps regulate your internal clock and creates mental clarity. Without routine, each day becomes chaotic, and energy is wasted on decision fatigue. But when your day is scaffolded with intentional structure, your biological systems sync up. Hormone release, digestion, cognitive performance, all improve when they follow a rhythm. This rhythm doesn't need to be rigid, it just needs to be consistent enough to reduce chaos. Within that structure, your brain can dedicate more energy to growth, reflection, and mastery. You begin to experience momentum, not as luck or motivation, but as a biologically supported flow. Consistency in structure makes consistency in behavior possible, and over time, that consistency becomes your new identity. Another key aspect of biological support for change is limiting overstimulation. In the modern world, constant exposure to screens, notifications, noise, and endless scrolling keeps the brain in a state of hyperarousal. This state floods your system with stress hormones, diminishes focus, and weakens impulse control. To create a life of intention, the brain needs space to think, feel, and reset. Periods of sensory reduction, whether through digital detox, quiet walks, or even just sitting without input, help the nervous system down-regulate and recover. These moments of stillness allow the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for planning and decision-making, to operate at full capacity. When you give your mind room to breathe, it begins to integrate insights and generate clarity. Silence becomes productive. It becomes easier to hear your own thoughts, clarify your direction, and act from wisdom instead of distraction. The absence of stimulation becomes a source of strength. Ultimately, biology is not the enemy of transformation, it is the gateway to it. Every choice you make that supports your body also supports your mind. These biological levers, sleep, movement, breath, sleep, food, structure, and recovery, are not complicated or costly. They are accessible, repeatable, and profoundly effective. They don't depend on willpower or motivation. They depend on rhythm and consistency. When you commit to aligning your physiology with your goals, change becomes not just possible, but inevitable. You stop forcing progress and start experiencing flow. You feel better not just mentally, but physically. And that feeling of wellness becomes the momentum that carries you forward. Transformation stops being a fight. It becomes a natural evolution. You're not trying to override your biology, you're learning how to use it. There's a fundamental difference between being at the mercy of life and actively shaping it. That difference lies in the mindset known as internal locus of control, the belief that you are responsible for the outcomes you experience, not just the circumstances around you. When people feel like passive recipients of life's events, they become reactive, frustrated, and often stagnant. But the moment you begin to own your choices, your behaviors, and your perspective, your brain starts to function differently. This shift activates regions responsible for planning, impulse control, and long-term decision-making. You no longer default to survival responses. You begin to engage with life through strategy and intention. Taking ownership doesn't mean blaming yourself for everything. It means taking command of how you respond. It puts the power back in your hands and signals to your nervous system that you are in the driver's seat. This belief, once deeply rooted, becomes the foundation of true, lasting transformation. Ownership begins with language. The words you use, especially the ones you say to yourself, shape your perception of control. Phrases like, "I have to," "I can't," or "this always happens to me," are signs that external forces are dominating your thinking. Replacing these with, "I choose to," "I'm learning to," or "I will figure this out," communicates something very different to your subconscious. It tells your brain that you are not a victim of routine, genetics, or fate. You are the agent of change. Over time, this language patterns neural responses, teaching your brain to anticipate solutions rather than obstacles. And when your brain expects solutions, it becomes more adept at identifying opportunities, even in difficult situations. Your internal dialogue becomes a compass, guiding your attention and reinforcing your agency. You begin to think in terms of action rather than avoidance. That mindset rewires how you approach challenges and fuels long-term growth. Control over your responses creates emotional resilience. When you understand that your reaction is a choice, you reclaim a sense of authority over your emotional state. Most people assume that feelings are facts, that if they feel angry, they must express it, or if they feel discouraged, they must stop. But emotions are signals, not commands. When you learn to pause and observe your feelings, you shift the power dynamic. You go from being controlled by emotion to understanding and directing it. This process strengthens the connection between the emotional centers of the brain and the prefrontal cortex. The result is not emotional suppression, but emotional intelligence. You gain the ability to respond with clarity instead of reacting with intensity. Each time you practice this self-regulation, you reinforce your belief that you're in control. The more you prove to yourself that you can choose your response, the more your identity evolves around that strength. A key part of developing an internal locus is asking better questions. When people feel powerless, they ask questions like, "Why does this keep happening to me?" or "What's wrong with me?" These questions direct the brain to search for disempowering answers, but empowering questions shift the focus. What can I learn from this? What is this challenge trying to teach me? Or what's the next best step I can take right now? These questions activate curiosity, problem solving, and optimism. They steer mental energy towards solutions and possibilities. Your brain begins to perceive difficult situations not as traps, but as puzzles to be solved. This reframe opens the door to resilience. Over time, it becomes a habit to look forward rather than backward, and you build the mental habits of self-trust, adaptability, and perseverance. Your questions shape your focus, and your focus shapes your reality. This cycle becomes the engine that drives consistent personal evolution. There is also a physiological response to taking ownership. When you act with intention, your brain releases chemicals associated with reward and progress. Even small decisions, like getting out of bed early, setting a boundary, or completing a task, can trigger dopamine, reinforcing the behavior neurologically. This feedback loop becomes a powerful motivator. Each intentional action confirms your role as the creator of your life. Over time, your system begins to crave that sense of agency and momentum. This isn't about achieving perfection, it's about reinforcing progress. The body responds to what the brain believes. And when the brain believes you are capable, the body responds with energy, clarity, and drive. Taking ownership is more than a mindset. It's a biological strategy for momentum. Your chemistry begins to shift in your favor, making it easier to sustain focus and motivation across days, weeks, and years of intentional living. Environment plays a crucial role in shaping your sense of control. If you're constantly surrounded by chaos, negativity, or disorganization, your brain absorbs those signals and reflects them in your thought patterns. On the other hand, when you create a space that reflects order, purpose, and care, your mind becomes calmer and more focused. This isn't about aesthetics, it's about signals. A tidy space signals discipline. A quiet environment signals peace. A visible goal board signals vision. These environmental cues are interpreted by the brain as structure and support. They make it easier to believe you are in control because your surroundings reflect intention. This doesn't mean life becomes sterile or rigid. It means your space becomes a mirror for your internal standards. You start designing not only your day, but your physical world to reflect who you're becoming. That design reinforces behavior, identity, and belief, all pillars of a lasting new start. People with a strong internal locus tend to take action quickly. They don't wait until they feel confident. They act, and confidence follows. This behavior flips the traditional belief that you must feel ready before making a move. In truth, waiting for certainty often leads to stagnation, but taking even a small step creates feedback that informs your next decision. Momentum doesn't require massive effort, it only requires motion. Each step you take, no matter how small, proves that you are the kind of person who makes things happen. This evidence changes your story, and your story is what the brain builds your identity around. Action becomes not just a tool for achievement, but a tool for self-definition. And the more you act, the more your world begins to shift around your efforts. People respond to your energy. Opportunities appear where they once seemed invisible. You move from reacting to creating, from waiting to leading. Failure also looks different through the lens of ownership. When you believe you control your growth, failure becomes feedback rather than identity. It is no longer a verdict on your worth, but a lesson about your methods. This mindset dissolves shame and opens the door to experimentation. You stop fearing mistakes because you see them as necessary steps toward clarity and skill. This reduces anxiety, increases resilience, and sharpens your learning curve. You become more willing to try new things, take risks, and explore different approaches. Each setback becomes an opportunity to course correct and refine your direction. Over time, this flexibility becomes a strength that others admire, but more importantly, it becomes your own internal foundation. You begin to believe, without question, that you can recover from anything and build again. This confidence is unshakable because it's not based on outcomes. It's based on your proven ability to adapt. Another key element of cultivating this mindset is practicing intentional reflection. Taking time to review your day, your choices, and your growth creates self-awareness. This awareness helps you separate what you can control from what you cannot. When you stop wasting energy on things outside your influence, you free up mental resources to invest where they matter. Journaling, meditation, or even a nightly self-check-in can help identify patterns, wins, and areas for growth. These moments of pause act as anchors, bringing clarity and alignment. Over time, you become more strategic and less reactive. Your days become shaped by choice rather than chance. This reflective practice deepens your sense of accountability, not to external standards, but to your own values. It reinforces the belief that you are in charge of your evolution. And that belief, repeated daily, transforms who you are from the inside out. Living with an internal locus of control doesn't mean denying hardship, it means rising above it. Life will always present challenges, uncertainty, and pain, but when you believe that you can choose how to respond, you turn adversity into agency. This belief doesn't make you immune to emotion, but it gives you tools to navigate it with wisdom. You develop courage, not from avoiding difficulty, but from facing it with clarity and resolve. Over time, this inner strength becomes visible in every area of your life. You communicate more clearly, move with more purpose, and radiate a calm certainty that others feel. Your life begins to reflect your intentions because your actions consistently align with your beliefs. The world may not always be fair, but your response always remains yours to own. And when you own your life, you don't just survive, you lead, you create, and you thrive.